Mr. Chair, I've got 5:30 if you're ready to start the meeting.
I believe we are. If we could get the roll call.
Thank you very much. Carly Borchard. Gary Cecil,
Here.
Bryce Chisholm,
Here.
Carol Crane, Jeff Harvey.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Okay, let's go to item A2 for public comment. Do we have anybody for public comment?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we do have one public commenter who's registered at this time. I'd like to call Pablo Navaduran. Pablo, you'll have 3 minutes. Please start by stating your name for the record.
My name is Pablo Navaduran, and I live in Ward 3. So this is my first time attending Ward 5 meeting because I'm here to attend about the redistricting. So I went to Ward 3 and Ward 3 last meeting last week, and I talk about the redistricting on Ward 3 and Councilman Miguel Martinez live in Dark Spring, live in near Loma Park and the Dark Spring area. So Ward 3 and Dark Spring area are protected. So Ward 1, since Ward 1, I went to Ward 1 meeting yesterday with Jenny, since Councilwoman Jenny Burks is termed, or so she have a new, and Ward 1 we have a new council member in 2024 after election. So right now, today is Ward 5. So I know many of you live Northwest Reno, many far west of Summerland, up to University west of University area. So that this one could be significant impact. Ward 5 had to move to different ward, something like that. And if you were a city member, you may have to reapply after 20 or maps. So my computer, the laptop is still warming up. So I have 8 different options that include Ward 5. So I'm going to talk about Ward 5 in Verdi all the way to the new Northwest Reno, outer McCarran or of Northwest Reno. So that one will likely to be in Ward 5. Kathleen Taylor lives. So you cannot tell me, or you cannot tell you where she lives. They're like the 2 different main options. Option 1 is to extend Ward up to Keystone Avenue, or option 2 is to make a line for McCarran Boulevard of Northwest Reno and extend it to Collin Ranch area from Ward 1. So if you have any question for Ward 5, if you consider a map or anything else, please let me know, and I will be transparent, and then and we want to make sure every voice possible democracy. If we're trying to make sure. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Pablo. I have no other public comment registered at this time. Is there anyone in the room who would like to give public comment today? Is there anyone on Zoom who would like to give public comment? If you'd like to give public comment, please use the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom window. While you do that, I do have someone in the room who'd like to give public comment. Sir, would you like to give public comment today?
Yes, please.
Oh, perfect. Please come up to the podium and state your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes.
We have a lot to say. My name is Randy Scott. I live on K Hall Court up in Northwest. I think the reason I'm here, the biggest reason is I'm concerned about how much square mileage Reno is annexing. I recently saw an ad for a house for sale up in Cold Springs. That's 19 miles away. I don't want to be coming to Las Vegas. My parents moved up here back in the late 70s. I've owned property here on and off for the last 25 years or so. Only my house, but a rental house about a mile away from my house. Anyway, main thing I'm here is, again, I'm concerned about the quality of life and what we have here now, and I don't want it to go away.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else? Again, if you'd like to give public comment on Zoom, please use the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Mr. Chair, we have no further public comment.
Okay, we'll move on to item A3, approval of the agenda.
Carly Borchard, I will move to approve.
Gary Cecil, I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Move for approval. Okay, I believe it's A5 for the council liaison report, please.
Actually, Mr. Chair, we have A for approval of the minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Approval of the minutes? Do I have a motion?
Gary Cecil, for the record, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of March 20th, 2023.
Carly Borchard, I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes. How about the staff liaison report now?
Oh, actually, it's the council liaison report now.
All right, jumping ahead, sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I actually gave all my updates to other people tonight. So you're going to have a presentation on redistricting, and then you're going to have a presentation from our assistant city manager on all of the fabulous things that you asked me to follow up on. And I thought he would be able to do a better job. So that will be coming up. I did want to say, I just left a meeting from the Downtown Reno Partnership where I saw Chief Nance, and she gave us an update, excuse me, that she's still working on that downtown deployment model that we had been talking about. And I think, weather permitting, we might see horses downtown as early as Monday. So that's the big update for this meeting. And she's also working on some other bike deployments and getting folks out of the cars, and we'll see that soon. So that's super exciting. But most importantly tonight, I wanted to say a very special thank you and unfortunately goodbye in this realm to Carly Borchard. How long have you been on the NAB?
8 years now.
8 years. And we love you so much that we actually went to our legal team and said, how can we possibly get her for another 8 years? So I'm going to blame Paul for not letting you be here. He's going to be in big trouble, but I know Jeff has something to present to you, and we just can't thank you enough for all of your time and your dedication, and your commitment to our community is unbelievable. And from the bottom of my heart, you're a resource, such a tremendous asset, and I hope to see you in other avenues for sure.
For sure.
We cannot.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for this. That is so.
Oh, you're welcome. And that's all I have. Any questions?
Just a comment, just to thank you so much for getting with Chief Nance on the downtown safety. And I mean, there's a lot of excitement, I can tell you, in the montage about potential for foot patrol as well. But horses, wow.
Horses, yeah.
No, but seriously, I know that you've put a lot of time into that, and you've made it your #1 priority all the way through the budget hearing. So it's paying off, and we thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. And Chief Nance is just, I can't say enough great things about her and where she's taking this department. So thanks, Gary. Or Mr. Cecil.
Thank you. As Ms. Taylor said, we're sorry to see you leave. For those that don't know, Carly was instrumental, along with others in this room, to encourage me to apply for this board. So I'm grateful to you. And Ms. Taylor put a certificate together, and I'm going to read it. It says, "Certificate of Congratulations presented to Carly Borchard, recognizing you for your exceptional commitment and contributions to the community and advocacy for Ward 5, dated June 6th.
Awesome.
So thank you. Would you like to say anything, Carly?
You know, unfortunately, I always have 2 cents, right? I always gotta throw something out there. This is incredibly bittersweet. And I just want to put on the record that this has been one of the greatest experiences I've had the pleasure and honor of participating in. So with that said, I sincerely encourage anybody that likes to be in the know to apply for this board. It's incredibly informative and just a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed every minute. And I don't think I've missed but 1 meeting. So it's definitely been an interest of mine.
Well,
Thank you, guys.
hopefully you'll wait it out a year and.
Oh,
be back.
absolutely.
So-
Absolutely.
Good.
You won't get rid of me that easy.
Okay. We can move on to A6, Staff Liaison Report. Did I get that one right?
Yes, you did.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr.
good.
Chair. Tyler Shaw, Community Liaison for the record. I have a few updates for the NAB members today. We would like to start by, of course, recognizing Carly Borchard from staff. You've always been wonderful to work with, and we will miss you. So thank you for all your hard work on the NAB. Next, we have some RTC flyers up here at the front, and they were also distributed to the NAB members. The RTC is holding a virtual public meeting to receive or to give a final design update on the Arlington Avenue Bridge project. So if you're interested in attending that meeting, the information is up here at the front. Next, I'm going to talk about the Barbara Bennett Park survey. The City of Reno has launched a survey aimed at gathering feedback regarding future potential enhancements at Barbara Bennett Park. If you are interested in taking the survey and would like to register your opinion, it can be found on the city's website at reno.gov under the Parks and Recreation Department. You can also just Google City of Reno Barbara Bennett Park Survey, and it'll be the first one that pops up. Moving on, for the NAB members, there will be no NAB meeting in July. The next NAB meeting of the Ward 5 Neighborhood Advisory Board will be on August 8th. Same place, Reno City Hall, same time, 5:30 p.m. In lieu of the July NAB meeting, NAB members are invited to attend the Saturday, 7/29 Reno Aces game with Councilmember Taylor. And then my final update for all of you, member Frederick Bear has resigned from the Neighborhood Advisory Board. So we would also like to thank him for his service on the board. And we've let him know that he's welcome to reapply if he ever wants to rejoin. Those are my updates.
We'll go to section B on the agenda. Business items, B1, presentation and discussion regarding the 2023 redistricting process.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Callie Wilsey. Thank you so much for having me here this evening. I'm the Director of Policy and Strategy for the City of Reno and honored to be here to talk about the 2023 redistricting process. So what you see on your screen currently is a flyer that I handed out, and there's also additional copies over here. We're going to talk more about the details and the process we're going through. So do I get to control it? So here's what you can from me tonight. We're going to talk about an overview of the process and why we're redistricting this year. What are the rules for drawing of these maps? To help give you a better understanding of the timeline that we're working on, how you can give input. And I'm hoping at the end, not only to answer your questions, but there's a discussion about your communities of interest in Ward 5. Kicking off with all the neighborhood advisory boards, this process that we call redistricting, which is really the process of redrawing the boundaries of the wards in the city. Right now we have 5 wards and we are moving to 6 wards. So I think this is important that this is not about annexation. It's not about more land. We're not expanding the city's boundaries. It's the current footprint, but shaping it differently. So rather than 5, we'll have 6 by the end of 2024. This process will be complete. And this process is really important because it determines which neighborhoods and communities are grouped together for the purposes of electing your council members. Why are we doing this now? You probably remember a few years ago, all the governments were doing this, and we also did it back in 2021. So following any census, governments at all levels go through a redistricting process to make sure that their wards or districts are balanced in population. This is a different situation for us. Back in 2016, our charter committee, which is a citizen committee similar to our neighborhood advisory boards, recommended changing from 5 wards to 6 wards. The rationale behind their recommendation was by reducing the number of people each council member represents, they had the goal of being more responsive to their residents. This bill was supported by the state legislature in 2017, and the bill passed and got signed by the governor. And the bill stated that in 2024, the city would transition to 6 wards. And so that's why we're here. Going from 5 to 6 wards, but this does change the composition of your Reno City Council. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. Currently, your council is made up of 7 members. There's a mayor and an at-large council member. Both of those individuals must live in Reno somewhere, and they are elected by all the registered voters throughout the city. You have 5 ward members, and they must live in the ward in which they represent, and they're elected by only the voters of that particular ward. When this transition is complete, slightly differently, you'll still have 7 members of your council, but you'll have a mayor who similarly must live in Reno and be elected by all the voters, but you'll have 6 ward members, and they must live in the ward that they represent and are elected by the registered voters of that ward. A little bit about the timeline. This transition is going to take about 1.5 years to be complete. So our deadline for the redistricting process is we have to get these new maps, these new boundaries to the Washoe County Registrar of Voters by September 1st. So we have a few months to redraw the boundaries and get them over there. And the reason for that is it really takes that long to prepare for the election cycle and make sure that ballots are printed and all the right notification occurs and precincts are drawn so that there's a lot of work that goes in for the Registrar of Voters. So our goal is to get it over there by September 1st. And then these maps will take effect for all purposes necessary to carry out that election by that date, before January of 2024. And what we mean by that is we'll have these maps so everybody will know what ward they live in if they want to run. If you're a voter, what ward will you be voting in? Where will we likely see people campaigning in certain wards? But the transition will fully be complete when the Ward 6 council member is sworn into office in 2024, next November. When we talk about the redistricting process, the city has a commitment to make the process transparent, community informed, and data driven. And we have a few fundamental components to this approach. It's going to be driven by redistricting principles that we're going to talk about. We're going to use data and analysis to support those. And it is going to be informed by you, our community. As with our redistricting process in 2021, we've partnered with Flow Analytics, an independent data analytics firm, to help us take the information we receive from the community and help draw these maps to make sure that they are legal. We take your feedback and create the map to make sure that we're meeting all of the requirements. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those. So this kind of reiterates that redistricting process. It's iterative and it's designed so that everyone's voice can be heard and the deadlines for those new maps are made. But ultimately, we're going to go through a process of data collection and community input. We're going to draft some maps. We're going to then take those maps to the community and say, what did we get right? What did we get wrong? We're going to revise them, and then we're going to represent those maps and take those maps to the city council for their ultimate approval in August. This process may not, or the final maps may not be beloved by all. There is give and take in this process. But our goal and our commitment is to be extremely transparent throughout it so everybody can understand the thinking or why the recommendations are coming forward as they are. Let's talk about those redistricting principles that are so key to this process. So redistricting is governed by a series of laws across the country at multiple levels of government, federal, as well as state and local laws. Our principles up into the musts and the shoulds, just for us to kind of talk about them a little bit differently. So on the must sides, these final maps must be in compliance with all local, state, and federal laws, including the Voting Rights Act. All of these, our maps must be nearly equal in population. This is a requirement in our charter. They must be geographically contiguous. We must retain the current council members with existing terms that extend beyond the 2024 general election. So because that relates to wards 2 and 4. In 2022, the representatives for both wards 2 and 4 were elected by the voters for a 4-year term, meaning they won office till 2026. So we must retain them in their districts for that period of time and make sure that they have kind of full, this is their district, their boundaries might change a little bit, but they will represent that ward beyond this process up until that seat is up for election. Wards 1, 3, 5, and 6 will be up for election in 2024. That's what you'll see on the ballot. We must also solicit community input from the community. We're here. And then we'll talk about a whole lot of other ways to participate. And the 2020 census must be used as the data source. When we talk about the shoulds, we should be preserving neighborhood integrity. And you're going to hear me for the next several slides talk about communities of interest 100 times. And if you remember anything, it's communities of interest for the next few weeks. So, and it's really related to that principle. We should also be trying to preserve the use of existing natural boundaries on our wards and where we draw the line. And they should be as compact as possible. And we're going to talk a little bit about these. But you can see that some of these at some point may be in conflict, and redistricting again will involve compromise, but these principles are guiding the process that we're going through. So total city population is 264,000 people according to the 2020 census. So when we talk about what is our target or our ideal population through this process, at 6 wards, it's about 44,000 people per ward. Right now with 5 wards, it's about 53,800. So to kind of get just general summarized, each ward will have to get smaller by about 9,800 people to be able to get that. Quite that perfect, but kind of gives you an idea of what we will have to do to reach this goal. Of the population is total population in the ward. This is not citizens of a voting age. It is total population in the ward is the data set that we use. And the city's charter requires a deviation of about 5% or less. And so what that means is we know we're never going to get every ward perfect. It'll just be crazy to be able to do that. So the city's charter gives us a 5% deviation to be able to do that mathematically. Talking with our consultants, what they see really around the country is closer to 10%. So we have a pretty strict balancing population requirement here locally. Also on the analysis side, the contiguity. So we see we shouldn't have any islands in our maps. So we shouldn't be saying some section down in South Reno is Ward 2 as connected with Verdi, right? Like our goal is to not have that. We say no islands except for real islands, which we have a ton of here in the desert. So hopefully that'll be a really simple one for us to get through. Compactness is an interesting analytical tool that we use. Reno, in and of itself, its shape is not compact compared to cities across the country. And there are actual compactness measures that we will talk about through the process. But at the end of the day, it's really a visual test. When we talk with our consultants, they say court cases that look at compactness really end up coming down to whether it looks compact or whether it looks like that snake shape where it says no right there in the middle. Also use our existing or natural boundaries to help draw these borders. These could be major streets or roads, could be the Truckee River, could be a lake, a mountain. We'll use lines that are already being used as boundaries, but some of those we use to help guide this process. There are also a couple of legal requirements that are actually at odds in redistricting. Our 14th Amendment prohibits the use of race and ethnicity data to draw ward boundaries. Voting Rights Act requires consideration of race ethnicity data to avoid vote dilution, particularly when we're talking about minority majority districts. So our consultants who've been doing this across the country take race and ethnicity data in our community and look to see if it's possible based on voting age population to create a voting minority majority district. So they will do that in this process to see if that's possible. Here we go, communities of interest. So a community of interest is really a group, a community of mutual shared interest that has common social or economic interests that you can put on a map. I think the map piece is kind of important to that in the sense of we can geographically draw it. This could be special districts. It could be defined neighborhoods. It could be an HOA, right? Everybody in an HOA maybe has similar interests and we want to keep them together. Shared cultural heritage. There's no real definition of COI legally, but this is how we seek community input to understand where our residents feel our neighborhoods are, where their communities are, and how those work together. The idea behind it is by trying to keep communities of interest whole and not breaking them up, it provides better representation on the elected body. So let's talk about the public input process. So we're here in phase 1. And what we're doing right now is seeking input on communities of interest throughout the community. We want to hear from residents across all 5 wards about their communities of interest. What are your neighborhoods? How would you define different groups? And we have multiple ways to do that, and we're going to talk more about it. But what we gather from this phase is going to lead into drafting of that first round of maps. And we'll have several options, 3, maybe 4. And on June 27th, we're going to release those maps to the community. And then there'll be a new set of tools to provide feedback on those maps. Again, how'd we do? Did we get it right? Are there weird lines? Did we break something up that we shouldn't have? So we're going to seek feedback, use that feedback to revise those maps. And on July 27th, we will have another community meeting to release those maps. Those maps will then go to council, where it will go through a 2-step process as it's an ordinance that must be adopted by a supermajority of that body. Can you give your input? Nope. So the first way is we have a very simple, easy to use survey on our website that walks you through what is a community of interest, define yours, and there's a very simple mapping tool that's included that allows you to just draw a circle around it, and our consultants get all that data, and it's really simple to use. We also have a new tool called Districtor that actually allows you to draw your own boundaries for all the wards, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. You can attend a redistricting meeting. You're at one of them. You have a flyer with a whole bunch of other meetings listed on there that you can also go to. And you can also send your general comments to redistricting@reno.gov. All of this information is at reno.gov/redistricting. Survey is very simple. Tell us about how and show us your neighborhood and your community of interest. I encourage everybody to take it. It's very simple, just a few questions. It's really helpful for us to kind of build that first round of maps. But we also heard from folks that they wanted to dive a little bit more, for some folks wanted to dive a little bit deeper. So we've provided a tool called Districtor that really allows folks to draw their maps in their entirety. This is the tool that you're seeing. It's a screenshot of it. It is more free form. It takes a little bit more time to understand how it works. There's more detail in the mapping. There's no questions to kind of walk you through it, but the community asked for a way to participate at this level. And it's really interesting. And it also meets our goal of sharing information, because you can see there's kind of screenshot of several maps right there. Every map that's submitted is posted on the website, and you can actually see what other folks have submitted as their ideas. So you can kind of scroll through and see some of the other ones that people have come up with. This is Districtor, and I was kind of playing around with it, but just kind of wanting to show kind of how simple it is. Really, it is you select one of those colors and you just draw straight over the map. This took me probably 20 seconds to make. You just draw over it, and then in the right hand, those bar graphs build to show you how many people are in that population. So you can kind of see how close you are to that ideal population to kind of play around with it. And it's really interesting as you play around with it, because sometimes one of the blocks will be tiny and minuscule and it'll have 5,000 people. And then you go to another section of the community and the census block is much bigger and there's 70 people within there. So visually, it's very hard to tell. So this tool allows you to play with that. If you're going to do that, I do encourage you to read the Districtor instructions, the how-to guide. We put something together to kind of walk you step by step, and the redistricting requirements to help you know more in detail how those maps will work. And it's available, all that's available on reno.gov/redistricting. The last thing I will point out, it's a little bit hard to read, but there are several tabs on the bar graph. The first one's population, then it says data layers. If we're on the live site and you click on that, you can actually see race and ethnicity data, average or the voting age population. We will also be adding a layer of that highlights where council members' addresses are on the census block. This is part of transparency, and that's a part of the public record. The community has asked for that, so we are adding that data layer, and it'll be available here in a few days on that tool. Lastly, June is really our kickoff and seeking input on communities of interest. So we're here. We're excited to tomorrow night. We're hosting a meeting completely in Spanish. And we're leading up to our next community meeting on June 27th. What we're asking for is this first round of input to be due on June 22nd. The tools will still be available after that, but we do need some time to kind of say, here's everything we heard and prep that first round. So that's what we're asking for on June 22nd to get as much input as we can. It was a lot tonight, I'm sure. But I hope that explains a little bit more about why these postcards showed up in your mailboxes. And if you're signed up for the newsletter, all the information you're getting. I'm happy to answer any questions you have tonight. But also I would love to hear if you have any feedback on your neighborhoods of interest in Ward 5. Thanks.
A couple of questions for you. For the current makeup of the wards and the at-large, what happens to the at-large?
So the at-large position fundamentally goes away in November of 2024. They ultimately flip out.
That was due anyway.
Yes,
correct?
yeah,
Okay.
that is what the amendment that was adopted to the city charter in 2017 did. It said keep 7, but your at-large council member will go to a 6th ward council member.
Great, thank you. The other question I had was, you said in your presentation that the data is based on the 2020 census. At Director program, is that based on 2020 numbers as well?
It is the 2020 census data is loaded into that district or system to use that. And we've gotten some really good questions and conversation about growth in our community. And I think it's it's really about data integrity. So normally in the redistricting process, we would only do this once every 10 years, right? And I did think about kind of going to this process if there was another data set that could be used, but the census data is really the only thing that we have at the census block level where that level of information is available. Development data, we can kind of estimate where growth is going or not, but it's very difficult to kind of say, oh, apartment complex went up here, but are those new people or did they move from another ward? And so it's about kind of data integrity in this process and ensuring that we aren't, it's kind of like a legal aspect of making sure that we have a strong data set behind the maps.
The time frame makes it a little difficult because by the time you institute this in 2024, there has been a lot of development from 2020 on. So there's going to be some data that's obviously missed, but that's what I had.
Thank you for those questions. It actually answered a couple of mine. So this happens every 10 years, typically?
Yeah, typically it happens every 10 years.
Okay.
The census will occur on, 2020, 2030, and then the year following that, the U.S. Census Bureau releases the data. And then that's when everybody goes through their processes.
Just curious, how long have we been at 5 wards? A long time, right?
I think since we've been a city.
I think so too. Okay. I was just wondering if that's ever changed or if we've always been 5.
I think it's always been 5.
So what happens in 10 years? Would you guys reconsider another ward or would you just reanalyze the data?
So without another change to our charter, we would just reanalyze the data and balance it for population. To
Okay.
make sure that in 2030, we'll know the growth numbers where they are in reality with the census. And then we would rebalance the wards in that 2031, because it's usually about a year after the census. And we would rebalance at that point.
Okay.
If the charter committee, so to kind of answer your second question, the charter committee could come up with another recommendation between then and now. In their kind of review of the process and recommend it to change the wards again or change the makeup of the city council. The charter committee meets at least once. It's usually more, but it just triggers it once before every legislative session, because to change the charter, we have to go to the legislator.
Right. Okay. Got it. Just one more question and then just a comment. I'm just curious, do you guys consider the county districts at all when you're looking at this?
Question. So we don't necessarily.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely something that if somebody felt like that needed to be looked at, so that could be some feedback that we would accept to see how that works. From a precinct standpoint, what happens is anytime we redraw our boundaries, we then send it to the registrar's office and they redraw all the precincts, and they have an entire process that they have to go through and laws that says how they can do it, where the precincts all have to align. So whatever sample ballot you get in your ward is the same for everybody in that ward.
Mm-hmm.
So we trigger work.
Well, I guess that leads into my comment that I feel very strongly that keeping those semi-similar, the wards for the city and the districts for the county have always been pretty similar. And with the Washoe County just redefining their districts, there's some confusion there. So I would just really, really encourage, as people are looking at this, to maybe keep that in mind, or at least know what those districts are. That also leads into voting populations as well. I think that's something else that needs to be taken into account, because as a county resident myself, I don't have the privilege to vote for our county commission, or excuse me, our commissioners, council members. Thank you. So I think that that's very troublesome for a lot of the county residents because of so much annexed land.
Mm.
Literally a lot of the properties out in Verdi, you can stones throw into city of Reno property. So even though I'm county, right across the street is city, that sort of thing. So I just think that there should be some consideration on those. Thank you.
Thanks, Carly.
Carol? No? Do we have any questions for those that are on Zoom?
Bryce, do you have any questions for the presenters?
No, I'm just interested to see how it all comes about. I like the idea of playing with it and making up your own wards and seeing what works. So I like all the sites that they've put together. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Gary, you got a couple questions?
Gary Cecil for the record. Kelly, thank you for being here tonight.
You're welcome.
I wasn't able to attend the June 1 session, but I looked at the presentation then. I was interested to hear public comment. And I have a few follow-ups from that I wish I could have been at the meeting, so I apologize
No, that's
for
okay.
that. I also need to tell you, I tried the map
Yes.
thing. And as my 6-year-old granddaughter will tell you, grandpa can't even keep color between the lines. So it's nice to have a tool to help me. That said, one of the things I came up with it was almost like the Star Trek three-dimensional chess, in that you have so many variables and you might go in one direction only to the detriment of the other. So it sounds like, even for demographers, it's a kind of a trial and error. Would you say that that's true? So I shouldn't feel too bad if I keep going back and forth?
You should not feel bad at all.
Nor should the
It
public in
is.
general, right?
Yes, no,
Okay.
nobody should. It is a bit of a puzzle to kind of figure out how to best put everything together. And to your point, and what you're experiencing is what our demographers experience. And we probably won't be 100% on every single principle. And so it's, we'll prioritize making sure that we're following the law. And the legal requirements, and we do our best on those shoulds. And that's kind of how they prioritize the decision-making that we're going through.
So is evening out the population within 5%? Is that the primary one? Does that supersede all of the other ones that you had, like contiguity and that kind of thing?
Yes, the population balance is one of the highest priorities because that is one of our strictest legal requirements.
Okay. I asked, and somebody sent an email to you from me, if you could separately provide the population by wards currently. I'm interested in knowing how far some of them have to go towards that average, that mean. They're in the presentation then?
Yeah, and I'm so sorry, Gary, I should have brought this up. I forgot that we added these. So in your packet,
Oh, okay.
so
good.
the map that's in here after the presentation is the map that was adopted in 2021.
Excellent.
And what's with that is a data set, and that's what we're looking at. So the tables show you the total population of breakdown of each ward and kind of how far off they were of the 5 ward ideal population. It also has race and ethnicity data by ward.
Okay.
We would expect something similar with our draft maps and final maps for this process as well.
Okay, thank you. I just had 2 questions regarding the kind of segments of the area. In terms of a district, or was it COI, right? That's
Yes.
the acronym.
Yes,
Would you count downtown as a COI? quote, unquote?
definitely. Yep, absolutely.
And what would the boundaries of that rough boundary of downtown? What does it mean to you?
So, we've seen a couple people comment on downtown and their definitions are varied, right?
That's
So
what
it
I'm
could be,
asking, yeah.
it could be somewhere stretching from Midtown all the way up through the university. Some people have a more narrowed version of that. So we look at all of that kind of in this process. I don't think I have a particular definition that will win out.
Okay, so it's to be defined.
Yes.
Who has the authority? Do these districts or the like, I'm talking about a district name like Midtown or something like that. Are they legally defined, or how does someone come up and say, I'm going to claim that as a district?
So we don't really have defined neighborhoods. So sometimes you'll travel, right? And you'll get like a marketing brochure to say, come visit this neighborhood. And some cities actually have processes in place to do that. We don't here. So the Midtown kind of district really just kind of stuck from word of mouth and people who lived here, and we kind of use it as nomenclature, but it doesn't really have a legal definition for us. I think in probably the zoning code, potentially defining how they uses maybe has a little bit of it, but Midtown isn't really a real particular defined district that was approved by the city of Reno.
But someone could claim that as we want that kept together. We
Exactly.
don't want that broken.
That's
What ab-
exactly right.
What about the neon line district?
Somebody could do that as well. Somebody could say, oh, this district is important to kind of stay, and I define it by these boundaries. And here's why I think that that section of town should stay together.
What about the residents within the neon line district? Do they have the right to say, we'd like to carve out our neighborhood out of that, seeing as we weren't asked originally to be in it or to name it?
So I think that there would be a few things, right? You would be really looking at the contiguity would really kind of play a role in the final maps, right? Like any sort of area in town in the city of Reno has to be in a map. They have to be represented by somebody.
Right.
And so some of those other that we were talking about would play a role as well. So certainly like that comment could be provided through our feedback, and we would consider it kind of how it plays out with all the other principles.
Okay, that's a tough one for me. Just a general question. I've been shocked to hear, and one of the public commenters mentioned it tonight, gerrymandering. By the way, you know where gerrymandering comes from? I had to look it up.
I do not.
So Jerry's someone who was a politician in the 1800s in Connecticut, and he redrew a map and it looked like a salamander. And so they called it gerrymandering, kind of like that. So it's kind of, anyway, but I was surprised because all the definitions I've ever heard or the examples I've seen relate to configuring a district such that you're making it more likely that a political party has more voters or fewer, or what if fewer voters, whichever way you want to do it. And our council is nonpartisan, right? So why would gerrymandering be an issue? And was it an issue like in 2016, 17?
No, thanks for the question. So it hasn't been. When we did this process last time, we don't look at partisan data for the city of Reno process. There are individuals who may participate in the process that have access to that data set, but it's not something we review or consider in the city's process for the very point that you brought up in terms of our council members are nonpartisan.
How did you go about, or how did the university, since that's a transient population, how is that figured into the redistricting and voters and races, and how did you do the university?
Sure. So the data that we get comes from the US Census Bureau. So they would have rules in their counting process that occurred in 2020 in terms of how you handle university students. And the data would reflect what those rules are in the census in terms of who is transient, not transient, and the rules that the federal government puts in place for the census process.
Okay, thank you.
No more question, just want some feedback. I live in the Montage, so that's 400 units, and we publicized this a fair amount, and we've gotten some feedback. We have a community affairs committee, and there were two things really that came out. There was a difference of opinion as to whether we should push for downtown to be one ward or whether we should continue to support having multiple wards take a slice of it. And I think it wasn't 100%, but the consensus was that we'd still prefer to have multiple because it gets more interest. Downtown, for better or worse, tends to be a focus of Reno. And so the more interest in council, the better probably. The other thing we thought was, and this to your point about condensed, like infill, we've got a lot of high rises there and We're really trying to build a community spirit there because we want to pull in the same direction. So we'd love to try to keep all the high rises in the same ward. That's for now. There'll be more, but that's as much as I have
That's-
right now.
It's great feedback. Thank you. I was remembering one other question that came through on email. You were asking about the what we call drop-ins last round. I'm going to go to that. So in phase 2, once we have those maps, we will host a series of what we call drop-in sessions. And it's where you don't have to sit here and listen to me spiel for as long as I did tonight, but we say we'll be at this location for a couple of hours. We'll have the big maps posted. Just come in and talk to us. We capture your feedback that way. There's surveys kind of in person, but for folks who kind of want that one-on-one or have some questions, we will have those with the maps available.
Okay, do we have any more questions?
Mr. Chair, we have a few members of the public who are interested in giving public comment. If you'd like to.
Okay.
Perfect. I'll start with Gary Cecil. Or no, I'm sorry. I'll start with Mac. No. Go ahead, Mac. You'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you. For the record, Mac Rossi. This is just a curiosity question, and you said there was a comment that you don't have any islands. But if I'm looking at the map right up in the North Valley, looks like you've got 2 or 3 islands.
No, thank you for that question. You know what, you are right. Those are islands of county land that still exist, that are completely surrounded by the city of Reno. So those will exist still as the county. Correct, because they're still in county, so they won't play a role. They'll still exist in a non-Reno ward color on a map at the end of the day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, up next, we have Pablo Navaduran. Come on up, Pablo. You'll have 3 minutes.
All right, here we go. So here at a different option for War 6. So here actually 7 different options. Here's option 1 over here. You'll see over there. So the color of a pink over here is Ward 5, which is Kathy Taylor gonna be a new ward. So over here, the purple one is Ward 6, since like the line is very long. So the purple one, Ward 6. So option 2, you see different color. They're going to all Ward 5 all the way to Keystone Avenue, Ward 6. You see over here that Ward 3. No, hold on. Option 3 all the way to Collin Ranch, Ward 5. That's Ward 6. You see over here that option 4. That's one. Option 5. Option 6. And option 7. So if you guys if you any Ward 5 or need think the map is wrong or need to maintain a Ward 5, please let me know as soon as possible. And I hope we try to make sure I get the map perfectly possible by June 22nd. So since Cafeteria is not here, so give her a phone call. So have a nice day.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the room who'd like to give public comment on this item? Please go ahead, come on up. You'll have 3 minutes. Please start by stating your name for the record.
Becker, I live right off Robb Drive, just north of I-80. The first thing is questions. We've mentioned census blocks and we've mentioned precincts. So I'm assuming that any census block or any precinct has to be totally within one ward, that you can't split a census block or a precinct. Is that correct?
So the census blocks are what we use. We don't break up the census blocks, and then the precincts are redrawn when we're done. So the wards could have multiple precincts within them because there's other rules that go for the Washoe County Registrar of Voters.
Okay, and the census blocks are defined by the federal government agency, but the precincts then is a county thing.
That is correct.
Okay, and so I mentioned where I lived.
currently I'm in Ward 5, but before the last redrawing, I was in Ward 1 on the north side of I-80 when most of Ward 1 was down on the other side. So I like the fact that I'm with all my other neighbors now, and I would hate to see it go back to the other. And to me, that's a community of interest. And I'm not going to be so nerdy as to try to draw a map, but I would see start from Verdi coming in toward the city until you get to 44,000. Start from the north, come down until you get to 44, probably from the south. I see downtown as being more a community of interest with Midtown, but of course I don't live in any of those. And your point about having more representation, I get that issue as well. Thank you.
Just a note for the public commenters, if you could come up after your comment and fill out a form so we can make sure your comments are captured as part of the process, we would appreciate it. Who would like to give comments next? Go ahead, come on up, you'll have 3 minutes. And get your name for the record.
My name is Donnie Borden. I stay off 6th and Ralston in Ward 5. Full disclosure, I am an employee of the city of Reno, though, but I'm here as a citizen. I have some questions that might clarify things for people and for myself as well. If you're using the redistrictor app, can you stay anonymous?
Hold on, I'm going to look at my colleague. The answer to that is yes.
Okay, second question. I see there are some areas in Southwest Reno, looks like the Hunters Creek area, that are not physically connected to any other part of the city of Reno. How does that work for continuity?
So when it's a little bit hard to see on this map, but I actually think down in the Southwest area, it actually does connect by a very, like maybe one parcel connects to the other. You really have to kind of zoom in to see that connection, but it does exist.
The third question, I don't know if this is something that people are going to be encouraged to do, or whether this is, well, I don't know which of these two are going to be encouraged more. Should people try to connect communities of interest that are currently split between multiple wards, or try to maintain the current wards as close to what they are right now?
I think that's a great question. So usually when we are, like when we did the redistricting process in 2021, I called it flirting around the edges, right? Because it was just trying to balance that population and keep communities of interest together. I think this process, because we're moving from 5 to 6, is going to lead to more substantial changes, or has the possibility to lead to more substantial. So I think you could think a little bit broader in trying to say, right now it's split, could we get them together?
Thank you.
You.
Thank you for your comments. Please go ahead, come on up. Go 3 minutes. Please start by stating your name for the record.
Hi, I'm Warren Lyons. I live in Sierra Canyon. My question is, what kind of vote is required at City Council to adopt the map? And is there any possibility, I'm not advocating it, that there is litigation after the vote is taken?
We'll see for the record. So adoption of a new ward map requires 5/7 vote of the city council. So it's a super majority vote, and it's an ordinance. So there's 2 votes: ordinance introduction and ordinance adoption. As with anything in the city, any decision of the city council could be litigated.
Go ahead, come on up. You'll have 3 minutes. Please state your name for the record.
Scott Hudson, Ward 5, Sunnyside Drive. I looked at the distributor with my wife tonight for the first time. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful tool. But I had 2 questions that I didn't see on the map that would help me, conceptualize, the redistricting. The first one was police and fire response substations, and if there's a way to see that on the maps, to equalize response times. And that was a question that I had. The second thing that occurred to me
is that I was able to participate in the rezone for the Montessori school on Sunnyside. And placing that Montessori daycare was to create a community infrastructure care to make it so some of the parents in the neighborhood didn't have to go as far, so I don't know if there's a way to identify those kinds of infrastructures, to create, ease of transport. But those are my two questions. Thank you.
For the record, we will look about the police and fire stations. I know we obviously have that data, so I would just need to see if that's compatible, that can go into the system, but we can look at that. From a school standpoint, we could also look at that. We have school districts on there right now as one of those data layers. So it's broken down by elementary, middle, and high school, so you can see the different school zoning districts. But I don't think that will get to the Montessori school, but you could just define that as a community of interest in the survey and say, like, this is what we feel is that boundary neighborhood. The other layer that we do have on the map, it's labeled as neighborhoods, but it's developments that have come forward. So tentative maps, PUDs are kind of on there. So you can kind of see, 10 years ago when a 100-unit tentative map came through, you could kind of see what the intent was to have that neighborhood. So that data is on there as well.
Is there anyone else in the room who'd like to give public comment on this item? Is there anyone on Zoom who'd like to give public comment on this item? If you'd like to give public comment, please use the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Mr. Chair, we have no further public comment on this item.
Thank you, Tyler. All right, we'll move on the agenda. Item B2.
Thank you guys very much. Great conversation
you.
tonight. Appreciate
Thank you
you all.
so much. Reno staff, Title 18 zoning cleanup.
Good evening. Grace McAdin, for the record, Senior Management Analyst. I came to the Ward 5 meeting a couple months ago when you had it up in Verdi, so it's nice to see you all again. Tonight, I'm here to briefly discuss our zoning code cleanup that we're about to kind of start the process on. 2021, we adopted a new zoning code. This was a fairly robust process. Our code prior to that was probably 2,000 pages, and this took it down to about 600 pages. So it was a very comprehensive process. It took about 3 years. We used a consultant to kind of help us with best practices. What are other jurisdictions using that you see work? We created a technical advisory committee of people who are using our code and coming forward with projects quite frequently to say what's working and what's not. What would you like to see us do? And then we made sure that we implemented goals and policies that we saw in our master plan to make sure that those two documents are consistent. So this was adopted in 2021. And this where we're at in the process now. We have this new code and we've been keeping track of things that maybe aren't working, or maybe we thought they would be a great idea, but in practice, they may not be as great as we thought. As part of this update that we adopted in 2021, our goals were to streamline and simplify, reorganize and update development standards, improve user friendliness, and revise development review process and procedures. And so really it was just to make it, the biggest goal here was to make it user friendly. Our goal or our code before, had references to all of these different sections. If you weren't familiar with the code, you had no idea what the requirements were. So our goal was to say, if you live in an MF14 district, you should be able to pull up our code. What are my setbacks? What are my parking requirements? What are my landscape requirements, so on and so forth, and so that anyone can really develop it. It doesn't have to be a consultant or a developer. As part of this process, we always anticipated that there would be a cleanup after the big adoption. With a comprehensive code update like that, it's very rare that you adopt it. Everything's perfect and you don't want to change anything. And so we made sure that staff kept a list of items that, like I just said, maybe weren't working, even things like grammatical errors, spelling errors, referencing code sections that might not exist anymore. And then larger issues. Oh, this lighting section might not work as well as we thought, or we've been getting a lot of complaints about this. Those are all categorized under zoning code cleanup. And so I want to make sure that we have these two buckets that we'll talk about later, but we have the zoning code cleanup, which is really minor incremental changes to get to a code that we're all comfortable with. And then we have city council priorities. These are larger issues that will go into more detail, but some of these might not be able to bring forward in this zoning code cleanup. We'll try to get to some of them. That's a larger bucket that we'll have to deal with in the next coming years. Zoning code cleanup items, that's the first bucket that we'll talk about. As I said, these consisted really of grammatical errors, inconsistencies where it says your setbacks 10 feet in one section, and then you go to another section and it's 20 feet all of a sudden. Those things we really need to get cleaned up. Unintended changes where we brought down a change from our old code. We didn't realize that it had changed or that it had those types of consequences. And then larger items, things that maybe might affect how we are actually implementing the code, or depending on your staff member, how they're interpreting the code. We'll walk through kind of some of the examples that we've found in our zoning code that we want to make sure that we address through this process. To preface this, I want to let you know we don't have anything in draft form. So this is our first step of this process where we're just bringing you the issues and how we're thinking about them and what we think the issues are. And we would really just like to get the input before we start any of this draft language. And so one of the examples of what we call a hidden Easter egg in our zoning code, it's all districts except in a parks, greenways, and open space district. Ball fields, ball courts, and parking areas shall comply with following standards. Lights shall be shielded from adjacent residences. Great. Courts and parking areas shall be screened from adjacent residential zone properties. Great. And then we have a standard in there. All court and parking area lighting greater than 3 feet in height shall be subject to a site plan review. I don't know if that's good or bad. The funny thing is that it's not in our lighting section. It's in a totally different section. And so we didn't really, it was something while we were reading through applying to a ball field that we went, oh no, we have to make sure that all of these are getting site plan reviews. So either we need to put it in a different section. We need to evaluate if 3 feet is the necessary threshold, and if they even require a site plan review. So those are things that we'll look at for that example. Another example of a hidden Easter egg is additional standards for multifamily districts. We allow for reduced setback requirements if you get a conditional use permit. And so how it reads is any project requiring a conditional use permit in a multifamily district shall have a minimum 20-foot setback from any property line abutting single family. What about the projects that don't require a conditional use permit? They can have a 0-foot setback? That doesn't make sense. So things like that. Maybe. Something else that we want to clean up is residential compatibility. These are things where we've seen conflicting regulations. We have language in our code that talks about setbacks, which is fairly understandable. Everyone knows that a setback is, well, not everyone, but a setback is how far you are maybe from the street or your property line. But then we have something in code called step backs. And this is where it gets very confusing, where the second story has to be stepped back a certain amount. And those types of regulations we found might not have worked as well as we had hoped. And so we want to keep what our intent was and our goal, but maybe word it a little bit differently. And one of the options we were thinking of and saw in some other codes is a list of design options where it's just straightforward. You have a list, you can choose from it. If there's not really any interpretation that can be made. Something else that I think has come up a lot since our zoning code adoption is industrial development. Now, I think it's important to note that we adopted our zoning code in 2021, which was really right in the middle of this COVID pandemic, and industrial development just skyrocketed. We always say everyone's at home shopping now. And so we've been seeing a lot more demand for this industrial type development. Some things that we've seen that might not work as well as we had hoped, or what we would like to look at with this cleanup, are hours of operation, dock door locations, lighting concerns, and noise concerns. So not that we want to stop industrial development. I think it's necessary, but how do we mitigate it so that that relationship with residential and industrial works a little bit better? something I've alluded to throughout the presentation is just confusing requirements for lot and building standards. So we have some zones where you can have 2.5 stories, and then the half story is defined in a very complex way. You know, what does that mean? Can you not stand up in it? Is it, you know, what is a half a story? Then we have, you know, 2 different sets of setback standards where it might defer you to a different section of code. And I think this would be frustrating for me as a homeowner to just want to know if I can build an addition, and you go to find your regulations and you're all of a sudden trying to become a planner or engineer. And so we just need to make sure that that is clear for everyone. Anyone can go to our code, figure out what their standards are. Council priorities. So this is the second bucket that I had touched on. This is the list of priorities that we received from City Council of things that they would like us to look at in the coming years. Since this is a cleanup, we can't touch on everything. We can't, you know, complete our sustainability section because we don't have a sustainability section. That would be a whole separate process. 3 things that we are touching on in this cleanup process are appeals, signs, and telecommunications. And the reason for those 3 is we did hire a consultant that has a planning background as well as a legal background. And so they're able to kind of help look at the litigation and case law of these 3 items and give us some best practices techniques. Outreach process. This is kind of the very start of where we are in the zoning code cleanup. We have gone to Ward 3 NAB, we went to Ward 1 NAB, and now obviously we are here tonight. We did some internal staff meetings just to ask staff members, you know, what are your thoughts on our zoning code, what's working, what's not. And then we did do some stakeholder meetings with the sign industry as well as the telecommunications industry to see what their thoughts were. We have created a web page. You can submit public comment on this web page, and any draft document will be uploaded onto this website. As NAB members, we have uploaded you without your consent to a stakeholder list, so you'll be receiving emails from me. I promise not to abuse that, but you should be getting emails from me quite frequently, and I'll try to stay up to date. So if we do upload a document, I'll let you know, so you don't have to just keep checking that website. We will be forming a technical advisory committee. This back since we've adopted the code, I went back and looked at anyone who has submitted more than one planning case or planning project. So that these are the people who have worked with this new code multiple times. I don't want to bombard maybe a restaurant owner who applied for one minor conditional use permit. They're probably not the technical expert we're looking for. These are people who are in our zoning code multiple times per week that can really help us nail down kind of those really nitty-gritty details that would probably bore other people. So that's kind of where we're at right now. I think that's the last slide. Oh, timelines. So summer of 2023, which is really right now, but it'll probably be more August, September. We hope to have draft edits and then really have some good stakeholder input of what people's thoughts are. Fall or winter of 2023, we'll continue this public review and engagement, but with the draft documents, so we can actually bring something in front of people and say, here's what we came up with. What do you think? Winter of 2024, so next year, we hope to actually have the final approvals done. So this is a very high level timeline, flexible. We don't want to push anything through that's not ready, but this is kind of what we're shooting for. That's it. For questions.
For that presentation, I do have one question. When these changes that are made, is everybody up to this point grandfathered in on what they've done? They're not going to have to go back and make any changes, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So if there's, for example, an industrial development, and we change our lighting section, they can continue. We do have a nonconformity section that addresses that when they would have to be brought into conformance, but they are grandfathered as long as that use continues.
Okay.
But I am just curious. I saw your list of the council's priorities, and there's quite a lot of good stuff on here.
Mhm.
What are you hoping? You guys find your priorities or what you could tackle and that's it? Or are you going to maybe revisit some of these other items?
Definitely revisiting that in the coming years. Some of these are larger issues that we want to make sure we do on a separate process. And so, like I said, the reason that we are able to tackle signs, telecommunications, and appeals, one is those sections already exist. So we're not creating anything new. We want to make sure we stay within that cleanup realm. And two, because we hired a consultant who specializes in kind of those three items. So those three kind of are weirdly connected. Something like short-term rentals, that's going to be a huge process in and of itself that we can't wrap into this cleanup. So we want to provide this to let you know where we're going and what we're working on, but it's just not going to happen in this process, if that makes sense.
I understand. I'm just curious how you kind of see that playing out in the future years to address some of these other items. And is that something, did you guys create the technical advisory committee? Something that's going to maybe be retained for future years that could be working on some of this stuff to be bring in drafts?
Yes, we are redlining all the time. So,
Okay.
but so a couple things there. Frame on all of these things. Once we get this adopted in 2024, we will be making a substantial effort in our master plan update process to make sure that we're supposed to update that every 5 years and we're a little behind. So that will kind of take priority. But I think the best practice would be to, through your master plan, make sure that you're addressing these priorities in a high level way. So things like major drainage ways, wildland, urban interface, and wildlife safety, those are pretty high level policy issues. And so we will get a little bit of better feedback from council and the community of a bigger picture, what we want to address, and then nitty gritty zoning code of what you can do and or what you can build and how you can build it. That's where we'll take some guidance from our master plan and address those types of things. I don't necessarily see much with smoke-free businesses as far as what we can do in our zoning code, but it was identified as a council priority. So maybe we can have something in our master plan as a preference for smoke-free businesses. After 2024, after we do our master plan update, take these maybe one by one or group them if it makes sense and start taking these forward as text amendments.
Awesome. Just to kind of tie in both of those questions, I think that's kind of my concern is once all the developments built and everything's done, what type of wildlife are we really going to benefit if we don't have those type of mitigations in place? So I just really encourage a couple of these items on this priority list to be considered probably a little sooner than later. Thanks so much for being here and thank you for your presentation. It's great
Yes.
information.
Thank you. And I was just going to say, if you do have concerns that even though they're on this list, but if you have specific concerns with wildlife or the wildland urban interface specifically, whatever you have concerns at, I would recommend you either send me an email or provide comment, and maybe we can wrap it into something else that is cleanup, but might address some of those concerns in the meantime for development.
Go ahead, Gary. Thanks for being here, Grace. Always good to see you. I read through the email you sent out, which kind of laid out some of the most immediate things to look at. The Technical Advisory Committee is a key committee. Who chooses the members of that?
And so this was difficult for us. Like I said, we want people who are very familiar working with our code in order to make it so it wasn't just, well, I like what they have to say and I really like what they do. I went back and like I said, I went through 2 years of planning cases and I said, anyone who has submitted multiple planning cases is a technical expert. So we do have a fairly, maybe 20, 25 people on this committee, which is larger than I had wanted. But the last thing I wanted was for it to appear like I had handpicked all of my best friends to sit on a committee with me. So it's only people who have submitted planning cases. And that was really the only way that we could make it fair so that I'm sure there's people in our code every single day that might not submit planning cases. It would be difficult though to make it fair without some sort of basis.
Is it still open to make some recommendations of people? I have somebody in mind, honestly, he's AICP, still active, has been for years. He was a city manager in California. and he has a tremendous background in planning and administrative code like this. He also has more of a resident perspective than somebody who actually a developer or something like that, which I think is a voice that needs to be heard. May I please submit the name to you for consideration?
Of course, yeah,
Okay.
we'll take those recommendations, and I would like to say we will have those stakeholder meetings as well later on. And we have those drafts available for anyone to look at. So there's options for everyone to kind of stay involved, but please send me any emails of people you think might be.
Yeah, I'm interested in having somebody there with a resident perspective early in the game, rather than have to sort of talk later when things have become not concrete, but a little more solid. To that point also, you mentioned in your email, there will be further review by larger stakeholders in August and September. Who are the larger stakeholders?
This is a couple buckets here. So larger as in this list of 600 people, anyone and anybody who would like to be a stakeholder can get on our list. And this list is people we are sending emails to. We will have meetings where we invite everyone on this stakeholder list to attend, flush through some of these sections. So one stakeholder meeting, we'll send out an email and say, today, all we are going to talk about is setbacks, and whoever would like to come can come. And so we'll have a couple of those meetings so that we'll really focus on it on a section. Some other stakeholder meetings that we've had is sign specifically. We had a meeting with both on-premise and off-premise sign contractors to get some input from them on what's working and what's not. We've had meetings with the folks from Scenic Nevada. And so those meetings will take place later on, but we say larger because although it's a list of 600 people, I don't think all 600 people will come to each meeting, if that makes sense.
Oh, I thought when you said larger stakeholders, you meant like a developer group or something like that. You're saying it's not so much they're large, there's a big long list of them.
Correct.
Okay. So
That could have been worded a little
it's not,
differently.
yeah, I thought it might be a handful of very larger ones having undue influence over the process. That's not it at all.
No.
Is that list available publicly in the public record?
It is not. I can check to make sure we can make those emails available publicly, and I could share that.
Okay,
Yeah.
that'd be helpful. And there are two, this is a review of all of chapter 18, right? The 300 some odd pages of it, all the different parts of it roughly.
Yes, well, as I said, when we adopted the 2021 code, we've kept track of things that were difficult to administer. And so it is a review, but like I said, because we're trying to keep it as cleanup, we won't be completely rewriting any sections. That will be in the future if we were to do a complete rewrite. The hope is to incrementally change our code to get it to where we want to be.
Okay. The two areas that are most interested me, and they usually are when any development projects come here, is residential adjacency. And I have a particular interest in mixed use zones, because there you've got multiple uses, sometimes butting heads or at least rubbing up against each other sometimes. Would it be possible to carve that out in some way for the NAB again, or a representative, for example, of this NAB to be involved, to even just to listen in? Because again, I'm interested in those items in particular from a resident standpoint, having some getting in fairly early before things are kind of already going down a certain path.
Definitely. So this has been brought up a couple of times as something that needs improvement, or at least to be looked at. I will see if we can carve that out specifically and make sure that we are looking at it. It's difficult because you have the screening section that applies to residential adjacency, the lighting, noise, those types of things are all in different sections. And so sometimes it's tough to look at it comprehensively. So what I will try to see if we can do is pick out those sections and maybe look at those in one meeting or one sit down. Alternatively, what we might be able to do is take a look at the code as a whole, but maybe create a memo of things that are different sections where residential compatibility is touched. And so you could look at that memo, and then we can maybe address it through that way of what you think is working or what you think may need to be changed. So there might be a couple of different ways that we could address that.
That'd be great, because I wouldn't presume to say that I would have, or we would have enough knowledge to be able to pick it apart as much as people who deal with it on a day-to-day basis. But there are certain areas that we have a vested interest in, and that would be very, very helpful. I would also recommend if you are open to that, letting the other NABs know that too, so that they might participate.
Definitely. And this was our hope with the stakeholder list. I think naturally, and I would like to point out, if you hear of anyone or know of anyone who would like to be included in this process, let me know and I can add that to this stakeholder list. Naturally, I think you'll find that some people are really concerned about residential adjacency and some people might be really concerned about articulation or setbacks. So I think naturally you'll have these groups form within the stakeholder list where we'll have multiple meetings and you'll see the same faces because they're concerned about the same things you are. And I think that's hopefully naturally going to occur so that we can make sure we're getting some consistency in those voices heard in those meetings.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Sure.
You have any other questions on Zoom or?
Bryce, do you have any questions before we move on to the public?
No, thank you. Just, it's a lot of information to take in, I guess.
Thank you. It looks like we do have someone in the room who would like to give public comment today. Please go ahead and come forward. You'll have 3 minutes and start with your name for the record.
Hi, it's Warren Lyons again from Sierra Canyon. And I have a question for you. I'm curious whether the translation document that moves property from county ownership to city ownership in a sphere of influence process, is that something that will be addressed as inconsistencies? For example, we have a parcel of land in Mogul, which is proposed for transfer by the federal government to economic development. That is zoned general rural. In other projects that I've seen, there is a table that helps translate county coding to city coding. The fact that it's both inconsistent and perhaps is a policy question. So my question would be, is that part of your review process in dealing with sphere of influence parcel transfers? Thank you.
Yes, great. Oh, gosh, sorry. Grace Mackinnon again for the record. So we do have a translation table in our zoning code currently. And so any project that's within the sphere of influence and outside of city limits, we would look at this translation table and see what the translation is. Something like general rural would have a low impact translation, like unincorporated transition or large lot. And so it really is the way that it's translated is units per acre, what you can develop. Those things are very comparable. We aren't looking at that right now because it would require zone change, master plan amendments, things of that nature. So if you had a general rural parcel and then all of a sudden we were like, we're going to change this translation table so that translates to general commercial instead, that's not something we could do. So that translation table is in code currently, and I'm happy to share it, or you can email me and I can share how that works, but that's not something we can or will look at.
Is there anyone else in the room who'd like to give public comment on this item? Seeing none, is there anyone on Zoom who'd like to give public comment on this item? If you'd like to give public comment, please use the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom window.
Taylor, I do have one quick question. Can we get your contact information? Do you have a business card before you?
Yes, I
leave?
don't have them on me. I can run upstairs and get them, or I can have Tyler send out my information.
I'll make sure it's distributed to the NAB members and included in the packet for the public as well.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, moving on. Item B4, update. Oh, I'm sorry, B3, downtown updates by city staff.
Hi, good evening.
Eric Edelstein, Assistant City Manager for the record. Thank you for the opportunity to present on a wide range of topics, all related to downtown. I did not prepare the presentation like the last two that you had, so you're going to have to look at me, and I'll do my best to work through a number of these topics, and then happy to have a robust discussion as we go. If it's all right, I'll just kind of hammer through them, and then we can talk about any of them in detail if you'd like. So the list of topics to start with was micromobility. So that study was complete. We presented in April to City Council, and we are now headed through another public process related to the findings of that micromobility study. So we learned about what worked, we learned about what didn't. Now the next phase of that public input is about understanding the priorities and the community's priorities. There will be limited funds. We will not be able to fund everything that that micromobility study found. So we actually had staff at the Downtown Tuesday Downtown Reno Partnership event that actually is wrapping up right now. They'll be at Feed the Camel tomorrow. And then I do have a flyer that I'll leave with you with a QR code if you'd like to provide your feedback through digital means. And that is where we stand on micromobility. Virginia Street placemaking was the next topic. And so again, that presentation came in the following council meeting in April, that final presentation. So we are now in the stage, we have $2 million in the state and local fiscal relief funds that have been allocated to the Virginia Street placemaking. So what are we going to do with those funds? That is now back in city staff's court. And so we're working through what we're going to do with those funds, including recognizing whether or not we need additional consultants to potentially procure items. So to kind of quickly run through the placemaking, what we sort of, the key takeaways is that we want to celebrate our character areas, and the character areas were defined as north of I-80 in the downtown core, and then just south of downtown. I think in this first phase, we are focused on the downtown. So from I-80 through this center core to the river, potentially just south of it. Looking at what they call 18/7 activation, so 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that is partly going to be achieved by the addition of an activation coordinator, which is a role that we added in a March meeting. We're actually in the final stages of interview process for that role right now. The activation coordinator is going to be tasked not just with Virginia Street, but looking at city-controlled spaces and understanding the gaps and voids in our special event programming, and helping to bring third parties to the table to help activate city spaces. That activation coordinator will have other duties as well, but related to Virginia Street placemaking, that's a key investment that we're going to be making. People are force multipliers in this space, so we feel like that's an investment that will continue to give. Also in celebrating that area, we recognize that I think probably the most stark finding from the Virginia Street placemaking was that 70% of the frontage in the study was inactive or vacant. So either a front facing wall or a vacant storefront. So council has dedicated $1 million in those state fiscal local relief funds to a facade and tenant improvement program. And so that was one of the topics asked to talk about. So that $1 million will be dedicated to matching grant funds that can support either facade improvements. We've seen in other cities what that can do to an old building to just get a facelift to it. We are weaving in tenant improvements as well. So we hear from restaurateurs, adding a grease trap into a venue that has never been a restaurant is a significant expense. So we are looking at both the facade, the exterior, and the interior of retail spaces to help come to market in the spaces that we really want to prioritize. And we've got to activate Virginia Street much greater than 30% if we're going to see a meaningful impact. The next element in the placemaking study was to elevate the baseline, and that is the streetscape in general. So the bike, we'll be looking at adding bike lanes. That sort of dovetails over the micromobility study, but adding bike lanes, looking at shade, looking at all the different ways that that the streetscape can be cleaner, friendlier, more inviting. Part of my short run so far here at the city has been visiting some other cities to see successful downtowns and what they look like. And one of the things that we have heard on repeat is, sort of in the chicken or the egg of, does the city make investments and private comes along, or does the city dovetail around where private is going? And we've heard fairly regularly that the city goes first. The government entity goes first, puts the investment in the space that they deem appropriate, and the private investment circles around that. So this elevating the baseline is about taking care of the frontage to frontage through the street that is the purview of government, and making that as good as it can be, so that the private business wants to continue to invest, or buildings that have blank frontage, maybe would be interested in kicking out and providing retail to the street. Along the lines of the streetscapes, the next item on placemaking was to connect the dots. And so nodes of activity is the way that we look at that. So, in the city, or in the car driven city, you go from place to place, and those things can be miles apart. In a walking and bike and micro mode driven city, those nodes of activity have to be shorter, and places that people want to stop on a semi-regular basis, and then continue on to the next one. So creating shade, creating benches, creating interactive placements along Virginia are all opportunities to help make that a more traversed space in the micro mode space. Activate the underutilized is the next item. That is also something that our activation coordinator can help with. So the study specifically called out Locomotion Plaza and Believe Plaza, as well as some of the alleyways. In our travels, we've seen some really cool activated alleyways. It admittedly had never considered it because none of ours are active. And so when you see what can be done, I don't think alleyways come first, but I hope that they are a fast follow as our streetscape improves. But our activation coordinator can look at Locomotion Plaza, Believe Plaza, and again, those are two nodes along the Virginia Street line. So that is placemaking sort of in the state that we are. So we're bringing people on. We are looking at some of the physical infrastructure that can help activate, create the shade, create the space, and then potentially what else can we do on those public plazas to help bring on more activity. The next topic was the Riverwalk improvements. And so common theme here, we have dedicated, or council has continued to dedicate significant amounts of the ARPA state local fiscal relief funds to downtown improvement. So we're working right now on an RFP for a Truckee River Path plan, and a little bit different than maybe some of the previous plans. We're looking at it in a more holistic way of not just the water and what the water touches on the edge, but also a block outside on all sides. And so taking a broader look at what is the real path along the river, what exists there, does it create connection, does it create barrier, and help understand, again, taking that Virginia Street study to the river, how do we create those nodes of activity, continue to build them along the river. So the Riverwalk improvements, the RFP that we're looking at is going to look specifically at, we'll include our parks and open spaces. That'll be an important part of it. But we have a PROS plan, Parks Rec Open Space plan, that is happening separately. So we'll be looking at our parks and open space along the river, looking at the mobility, so connectivity and accessibility throughout the river. And then the land use is what I think is particularly interesting, and looking at what the river alongside the entire corridor and understanding how we can build more connectivity. So that RFP is, if all goes to plan, will come to council the first meeting in July. And then if that continues on that path, we would expect to go through public input, lots of public process over the next several months, and would hope to complete that study by the end of the year. All these funds, as you may have heard a number of times, have to be allocated by the end of 2024 and have to be spent by the end of 2026. So deadlines are a good thing, and we have to keep the processes moving. The next topic that I was asked to bring a quick update on is code enforcement, and admittedly not an area I oversee, so not an expert in the space, but just got a couple of brief updates. Probably the most relevant, I think, for this group is that the SafeScape implementation for downtown retail starts on July 1. So that means no more sales of small liquor bottles or small bottles of alcohol, period. Updated requirements for security, surveillance, physical presence of security, as well as visibility through storefronts. And so all downtown businesses will have to comply with that by July 1. Communication did go out in the last week to all businesses that would need to come up to compliance on that. We're working with a number of folks who represent various commercial or retail establishments to help make sure that those rules are understood and everybody is complying. The last item I had on my list, and again, happy to answer questions from anyone that is here, is the Wingfield Barbara Bennett Park updates. So if you followed our social media, you've seen lots of calls for input on that. So we introduced the project in January. We've worked with a consultant, and is the survey that we're undertaking right now. So we're undertaking a large survey that will actually close at the end of this week. So it's been open from May 26th through now. After the community survey, the consultant will develop a conceptual master plan, and we'll have two public workshops scheduled to look at those specifically. And then the plan would go before the Recreation and Parks Commission for additional input. And we're looking at completing that plan this fall. And so that's just a couple of things that we're working on. You didn't answer any
Just a
questions?
couple. I have one comment if I could make, with respect to the Riverwalk. Is there a lot of research going on in terms of what options are available to you? I bring that up is I lived in Naperville, Illinois at one time, and they have a Riverwalk that is really, really spectacular for a lot of interaction for the community to walk and be involved. And why reinvent the wheel? Look at other river walks throughout the United States and get some ideas.
Thank you for the comment. And yes, specifically, some of the trips that we've taken have focused on peer cities that have a river through it. You know, it's not a long list, but we have spent time in Boise. We spent time in Fort Collins, and last week was in Columbus, Ohio, where they did an incredible $60 million project on their downtown river, and it's just outstanding. A little bit different scale than ours, but yes, to answer your question, we have and will continue to.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Great presentation. You covered quite a bit of information, so I was impressed to be able to follow it without a formal presentation, but great job.
Thank you.
Gary Cecil for the record. Thanks for coming, Eric. Appreciate it. In terms of timescale for micromobility and Virginia Street placemaking, I mean, you're pretty specific that July is for the code enforcement and the end of the year is the Riverwalks. What are the key dates coming up for the micromobility and Virginia Street placemaking?
Thank you for the question. So related to micromobility, I don't have the specific dates on that, but I do believe that that is a end of summer targeted finish.
Okay.
And then related to placemaking, we kind of have the River Path RFP and placemaking sort of butting up over top of each other right now. And so we've prioritized the River Path, little bit bigger, we for sure need a new consultant on it. And so we've put that first. So I don't have that firm date, but my own goal would be that placemaking would have activity, in the month of August and no later.
Okay. And is the bike path part of the micromobility or the Virginia Street placemaking? There was Center Street or Virginia Street. Has that been, I've heard waffling a bit on that. Has that been decided yet?
Thank you for the question. To my knowledge, no. I think all options remain on the table. However, the public input, I should say all options remain on the table, with significant input from our city engineer and RTC in terms of realities of where they would like to see things and where they feel like they are safest. But on the same token, that is part of why this public input is so important, to understand what our community wants to see and not prejudge any of those outcomes.
Do you have any idea when that decision will be made?
I'm sorry, I don't. Happy to get the information though and
Okay.
report back.
Again, the only reason I've got a lot of cycling friends that were counting on Center Street, so they're really, kind of interested in that. How far north and south of the river did you said like one block or something that in Riverwalk improvements? So on the north side, where would that go up to? What street? 2nd Street?
So the scope is still, thank you for the question. The scope is still being created. So in general, we're considering not necessarily a block even, but it's going to be a little bit different as you traverse the entire river path. But considering the properties of adjacency that have connectivity to the river across the entirety of that boundary is where we would create the scope. So it could be a block in some places. When you get to the AMC Theater, it likely will just be that building and it will go much further.
I see. And how is that being decided?
It would be created ultimately through the staff direction through the RFP.
Okay. Final, just a comment really. When you look, this is regarding the placemaking. It's great to see the idea of tenant improvements, and there's been some painting done, I think, through the Downtown Marina partnership to kind of spruce up. And you mentioned about facelifts, but there's an awful lot of blight. And I think you're running the city's effort on redevelopment now. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And when I look at the property tax receipts, given the increase in property values, there's tax increment there now building up. What are we going to do with that money for RDA 1, for the redevelopment of Zone 1? Because it's been a while since any money's been available, let alone spent, and there really are some blighted properties around there.
Yes, thank you for the question. So the redevelopment agency admittedly is a sort of a bolt-on to all of this because it's going to be part and parcel. So we have general financial understanding of the redevelopment agency based on current buildings in the current boundary. RDA 1 actually does not have funds accruing that are available to spend. We are still paying off past debt in RDA 1. We are updating the financial analysis because property taxes have hit a nice spike. And so we had originally, in 2019, we had a projection that said that RDA 1 would begin accruing spendable funds in 2026. We are hopeful that a relook at that now may show that timeline sooner. So RDA 2 is actually accruing funds currently and has a fund balance that could start spending. RDA 1, we still have a little bit of time before we can spend within it. To answer the second question of what will we do with those funds, we're building that right now. Looking at all those cities I mentioned, all have significant redevelopment funds, groups, organizations. They all handle it a little bit differently, but they all have some government interest in the redevelopment of largely historic downtowns. So we're going to look at that in a couple of different ways. One of which is looking at how people create new tax increment. If you build a new building within the RDA, it's 100% increment. So 100% of that property tax goes into the district. And so many cities allow people who do that to participate in property taxes as a way to incentivize. And then the other, for the naturally accruing increment from the already built buildings, there's a general thought of utilizing that to address infrastructure, potentially blight, and help remediate the space in a way that makes it more attractive to private developers.
Just one final comment. I understand you say paying off bonds or other things, so there's not, but all of the residents downtown have been paying those property taxes, and we're interested in trying to get some of those to spend on the blight. I think you're coming to the Montage in July, so there'll be some questions about that because we really would like to see some things done. Anyway, but thank you for coming. I appreciate it. It's just so much of there is so deep. We've been wanting to hear. So we appreciate Eric coming in, filling us in.
Thank you. Happy to come as often as you'd like.
Thank you very much.
Bryce, do you have any comments before we move to public comment? Go ahead and move to public comment. We have Mac Rossi here to give public comment. Mac, you'll have 3 minutes.
Hello again. Mac Rossi for the record. I'm a commissioner on the Park and Rec Commission. And the question is for this gentleman here that they've hired outside counsel to come in and look at the future of what the parks are going to be. And they highlighted on certain parks. And then they asked the commissioners, what interest did we have? I'm not putting myself on the block, but my questions were more senior activities and the river park, which was not even addressed at all. And they're going to be coming to council in the first part of July, to ask for money for this outside group to get more information. And I just wanted to make you aware that the Riverwalk, which I've always been interested in, is not on the list. So it might be something to consider. You can go to the park department, and I believe at our next meeting, and these meetings are going to go on for another 3 or 4 months. So you got some time to work on it. Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the room who would like to give public comment on this item? Seeing none, is there anyone on Zoom who would like to give public comment? If you'd like to give public comment, you can use the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Seeing none, Mr. Chair, there's no further public comment on this item.
Okay, we'll move on to item B4, update on the Ward 5 community project.
All right, Jana Moyer, Community Liaison for the record. Tyler's getting her slides pulled up. Thanks, Tyler. Oh, Bryce has got a bad connection. All right, so we're going to start just by reviewing the design thinking process that we agreed to use for our project at our last meeting a month ago. And we started with the empathize phase. So our task after our last meeting was to kind of speak with residents in our neighborhoods, talk to our friends, reach out to everyone we know in Ward 5 and ask them about the problems and issues that they are experiencing in their neighborhoods and across the ward. And we know that we've got some geographic diversity here and we talk to different, people. And I'm really excited personally to hear what you've come up with, what you've heard from people. Thank you, Gary, for sending in thoughts to get us started and have kind of a place to kick off from. I wanted to remind you that our goal for today will be to discuss the findings of our empathize phase. And really, by the time we leave, we want to select like a broad problem that we want to address. What I want to encourage us to do is to really focus on problems and issues and not jump into solutions. That is a really important piece of the design thinking process, is to spend that time empathizing. And then in our next meeting, once we've got sort of a broad issue that we want to address, then we'll really dig into what are some of the root causes, the who, what, when, where, why of that issue. And we'll write a much more clearly defined problem statement. I think it's human nature to, as soon as we see a problem, we want to come up with a solution. We immediately start to have ideas. And I think all of you are problem solvers. So I'm going to caution you to just kind of step back. We're not going to get into solutions today. And Chair Harvey and Tyler are going to help us make sure we're sticking to our goal, which will be to identify an issue that we can agree on we want to work towards solving or addressing. So just as an example, I might think that we need trees and shade canopies at Retrack Plaza. I happen to actually think that, but that's not a problem, right? So I would want to phrase the problem as maybe some areas of downtown are much hotter than other parts. So we're going to just dig into the problems and issues today and not solutions. And then we will have a recommended motion to select an issue, and that's where we will move forward. I'm going to give you a little preview of what we'll do at our next meeting, but I don't really have much to present today. This is more of an item for your discussion. If you have any questions for me, happy to answer them. But I think for right now, Mr. Chair, if you want to just open discussion.
Could I just ask Jenna one question?
Yeah.
Could you just, there are a few people in the public may not know what this is
Give an
about.
overview.
Could you just give them a quick 30-second overview?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Gary. So for everyone in the audience, Councilwoman Taylor has allocated $5,000 of her council discretionary funds to the Ward 5 NAB to develop a community project. And so we've selected this design thinking process that comes from the Harvard Design School to kind of walk us through the process, beginning with the empathize phase, and then we're going to move into defining the problem. Then we'll do all of our brainstorming of solutions when we get to ideate, and then we will kind of prototype and test what our project is. Our project may end up being something where we tag on to work that's already being done in the community. There's nothing in this process that says we have to create something completely new. Once we really dig into our problem or our issue, a piece of defining that and ideating will be looking at what organizations and nonprofits and groups in the community are already trying to tackle maybe some of the things that we're seeing, if there are any. And we may look at how we can partner with someone in the community. So today is really about trying to select an issue that we want to tackle. That cover it, Gary? Okay.
How about if we start with Bryce and see if he has any ideas, and then we'll go down the list or down the line.
Go ahead, Bryce. I will note for the members, Bryce sent a message saying he's having some internet connectivity issues. So if he is not able to give his comments, he's welcome to write them and send them to me, and I'll make sure they're distributed to the NAB members. But go ahead, Bryce. Like he might be having some
he might be having
connection
trouble.
issues.
Carly, would you like to?
Well, it
suggest
sounds like
anything?
you guys have an idea or two, right? I would love to just jump into what you guys got.
Okay, Jeff Harvey, for the record, I have one suggestion that a community member had provided me, and it's relative to substance abuse and overdose fatalities relative to substance abuse. I was thinking maybe we could somehow plug into that topical area. It is, but I mean, it's something we could, one of the suggestions was made, possibly providing resource material for where to get help, or what is substance abuse, what does it look like, how do you identify it if you have a family member, that kind of thing. So it's a broad topic, obviously, but I think it's relevant. Gary, did you want to go next?
I don't know if, did everybody get a chance to see the email Jana forwarded?
I did not.
It's in the packet as well.
Yeah,
Oh,
the
it
notes
is.
are
Okay.
included in the packet. Yeah.
That's good. I did my thinking all in one go rather than have to do it here. But my community is a little easier to gather in terms of downtown. You know, we've just done a survey at the Montage. 123 people did it, and we keep pretty close tabs with other downtown residents. So forgive me, my suggestions, I'm thinking of downtown, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be downtown. And taking Jana's admonition, I'm going to even narrow some of the needs even further, so I don't get my hand slapped. One of them, and I'm looking at the overarching goals here to make sure that they meet. Cleaning up downtown. There's some, that as a general area is one that got a lot of attention. We know that Reno is a town that is one of the towns that's growing the warmest in terms of rate of climate change and temperatures because of all the concrete. There is already a relief program. There was a lot of talk about possibly planting more trees. And to Jana's point, picking where that may be might be the issue. And there's an existing program that actually does that. One of the broadest ones that I got from our residents was help the less fortunate. I guess that's the way I would categorize it. For example, to your comment, Jeff, the Downtown Reno Partnership ambassadors have already saved, I think, at least half a dozen lives. They're supplied with Narcan pens. I know that is like a Band-Aid, but it does save lives. It doesn't get at the problem of drugs downtown or in Reno in general, but it's something I'm pleased people's lives have been saved. So there's an already existing group of people that carry those, but maybe they could use some more. The other one, again, one of the parts of our ward is the university. And the university has a Northern Nevada International Center on the campus there. I don't know if you know much about that, but it's for people who are refugees and they come to this area and they're replaced. They provide services for a period of time and help them get settled, meet people. But they really have trouble with families that leave that program. Sometimes they're cast adrift and they don't have any follow-up. So I think there's a need there. There's quite a lot of Ukrainian families that have come into our area, for example. Art. We could always do with some more art. Couple of suggestions there about teaming up with the DRP, but I'd be personally so interested if there were some schools in Ward 5 in general that have kids that are very artistic and would like a show somewhere, sponsor something like that, and have them show their art. And finally, one of the big ones that Kathleen actually, and we were talking earlier about the foot patrol and there's horses downtown, public safety is a huge one. I'd love to, one idea was to support Kathleen's and RPD's focus on safety, meet and greets for new officers or something with residents. We're going to get the first chance downtown this summer to have true community policing with police on the beat, walking around. So maybe sponsor some events there to introduce them to business owners, small business owners, residents, things like that. That's about as far as I got. Anyway,
That's
just some
awesome.
ideas. And if they're applicable beyond downtown, that's great.
Yeah. Well, I would love to just make a couple comments. The first one is the art. That just resonates with me. full disclosure, I'm not an artist. I'm a math person. So it was very complicated for me. That was actually the project that we chose for Washoe County, as you guys might remember, was actually bringing art program back into the juvenile center. And it was so impressive and so amazing to get the right individuals at the table, having the right discussions. It was like the funds were just flowing at us. And it was something that was very necessary for these children. But now that you say it, what about the other children? You know, I feel like it's really important for not just children, but a lot of people of all ages and diversities. And I know that it does have some therapeutic qualities to it. So I would definitely throw my support at something like that. And then just to throw out the pickle, the one idea that I was really passionate about for the different ideas that came up within our Washoe County Leadership Program was the concept of assisting the less fortunate that are living out of their vehicles. A lot of our areas, including Verdi and some of the other diverse areas of our community, are seeing an uptick of people parking where they shouldn't be parked, or, you know, camping where they shouldn't be because they have a vehicle, but they can't leave the vehicle. They certainly can't leave it for any certain amount of time. A lot of what I'm seeing is workers, construction workers that are homeless, actually living out of their cars, and they've got all of their tools in their cars. So leaving that vehicle is potentially throwing away their livelihood. So there's a lot actually out there once you get into the research of our community really needing some assistance there. They can't go to the shelter. You know, they might be considered homeless, but they've got their vehicles, so they can't. There's really just nowhere for them to go. So the idea that I started researching was a safe space parking, actually partnering with someone or organization that has a parking lot that can be utilized just in the evenings or at night. And the hope and dream was to actually tie in some resources there so that they can know where they can go get help if they've got some financial issues or legal issues or drug problems, you know, kind of tie in a resource center there. And it was really, really exciting. A lot of other cities have established these, so it's not, you know, a concept that's made up, but it was too grand of an undertaking for us to take on through the leadership accounting. We had 6 months to accomplish something. So that was a little bit too much for, you know, the time frame that we were allotted and how much dedication and time that these professionals had to give to the project. But I just wanted to throw it out there for an idea, just to throw it on the public record and say that that was one of the, all of us voted for it, number one. That was the passion project between our whole group. But realistically, we just couldn't accomplish it in the timeline. So we ended up abandoning it. But I ended up getting a lot of information. It's been presented to Washoe County. It's been presented to the city council. So there are past meetings that you can hear some of the thoughts and ideas that some of our commissioners and council have had in response to this subject. And I actually got all of the plans from one of the places that already have this underway and successful in a different city. So something to think about.
I think that's an excellent project. I think that's an excellent project. It's definitely timely and necessary. Very good.
I agree with Carol. I think it may be easier to get off the ground you've done a lot of the homework already. And a lot of the meetings have already taken place. So that might be something to think about.
I will share, just full disclosure, I did have some conversations behind the scenes with powers that be, and there is some concerns. There are some with it, and a number of different ordinances that are being passed, not only through the city or by the county, for like camping ordinances and that sort of thing. So that was another reason we kind of tabled it, was that that vote was just going to the council the same week we had to come up with our idea. And they felt that it might have conflicted with some of what council was discussing and considering. So, you know, something to discuss.
Carly, you had that all set to go to the city council?
Not city council, it was just my presentation for our group project
okay.
on this group that I was participating in.
Well, I think we're at a place where we need to make a motion for picking one of them. So any ideas, Carol, on which one you're?
Oh, I think it's more of a compact issue. And again, so much groundwork has already been done. So there's getting an objective is basically right there in front of you. You need like that.
Your thoughts, Gary?
I would just want to make sure we don't bite off more than we can chew. Yeah, I'd rather have an Edsel on the road than a Cadillac in the garage. And that's my only concern, Carly. It's a grand idea, and I honestly did not know that was as much of an issue. Don't see that too much downtown, so it's a more Ward 5 issue. But that's my only concern about that. Honestly, when I was thinking about it, I was more aiming to really piggyback on an effort that just was lacking a little bit of funding. And as you said, Carly, when you get going on this, it's like glue. People stick to it, and it becomes more sustaining, and more people might contribute and things. And so that's my only concern about that particular one. And if you've got some concerns from people about, you know, safety or other things, liability, then that becomes more difficult. That's all I would say.
Okay. Well, do we have anyone that would like to nominate a project? Because we need to come up with one tonight. Is that correct, Jana?
We don't have to. I mean, if you want to take some more time to think through the issues and come back maybe next time ready to vote, that's fine. The timeline that we came up with was, you know, sort of fluid. Just to add, I think, see our natural tendency. We're like, people living in cars, we need a safe parking spot, right? Like we jump naturally to that. And that's something that through the design process, if you chose that as an issue and you said, we've got a lot of unhoused people living in cars that don't feel safe in the cars, that, right? So then if we selected that as an issue, our next move would sort of be to dig deeper into that, do some research, find out why. And truly the empathize phase at that point would be, we'd want to talk to people who are living in their cars and find out what that experience is like. And maybe we can't provide them a safe space to park. Maybe there's some other way we could be of assistance. So, and same thing, like if you were looking at and you're saying, hey, we've got a lack of art downtown, a lack of public art, and a lack of funding for art in our schools, in our ward. I'm an educator, so another, you know, you talk about art, and I'm thinking too, there's a lot of students that don't have a true audience for things. So you create something in your classroom, it doesn't have as much meaning as when you get to display it in public, whether that's a speech and, you know, a piece of art, whatever. So I could see lots of different problems that would tie into, hey, we need more public art. We need funding for the arts. We need real world audiences for students to create. So there's a lot of problems that you can kind of work to solve with something like that. I don't think you have to choose right now if you all want to simmer on some of these ideas more. But I do think, again, just cautioning some of these issues feel huge. Like, you know, we talk about anything relating to homelessness, we're not going to solve with $5,000 and a few NAB meetings, right? But there might be something that we could dig into to see what little piece of that experience could we improve. So that's really where the design process helps us jump to solutions that are at a scale we can actually implement. But of course, if you're not ready to make a motion, we want to, you know, take some time to think about it. And we will have NAB appointments on the July 19th council date as well. So you might have some new colleagues for our next NAB meeting in August who might also have ideas. You don't have to make a motion.
It could be a good idea to table it, maybe give us a little bit more time to simmer on it.
Well, Carly, could you forward some stuff so we can take a look at it? I think maybe what I'm hearing is that we're coalescing around either helping those less fortunate than us, or maybe art as something that needs to be promoted more. That's what I'm hearing. So maybe that narrows it a bit. But we want to make the right decision, Jan. I mean, we don't, it'd be a shame to go down certain way down the path and have to turn back again and go, ooh, that was too hot.
Yeah.
Or something like that. We want something eminently doable.
I would definitely encourage you to wait a little bit too, just to get some feedback from the July 19th appointments. I would really like them to feel like they were a part of it, not just something they were thrown into, you know?
Just a reminder for open meeting law, make sure any communications are forwarded to nabs@reno.gov, and they will be distributed to the NAB members individually to make sure we don't have any serial communication or walking quorum issues. Thank you.
So I should just forward my communications directly to you and you will distribute them, correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
send them to me and I'll make sure everyone gets them on separate email chains, so there's no accidental reply alls or ethics complaints.
Thank you for that clarification.
Make the motion to table this topic until the next NAB meeting.
Carly Borchard, I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Passes. Hey, next item. Item C, boards, commissions, committee member reports, announcements. Do we have any? Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Just briefly, I wanted to recognize somebody that was a NAB member for many years that Carol, I think, Mac and Carly maybe knew. His name was George Foster, and he passed last week. He was a Montage resident, long-time downtown resident. He was a wonderful advocate for the Montage residents, but downtown in general. And he was very, very highly regarded. Within about half an hour of me hearing and sending out some notes, I heard back from a ton of people, including the mayor, who knew him very well. He'd been through some illnesses. But George was a real unique person. He had a sharp, agile political mind. And I had some great conversations with him, and the city will miss him. He was a good influence. Just wanted to recognize him.
Thank you so much for that. He was an amazing guy. He actually came to just about every one of our NAB meetings for several years, just as a participant, and finally got appointed to the NAB and ended up being too ill to carry forward. So very unnerving.
Are there any other reports from NAB members? Being none, we can move on to public comment.
Okay. Item D, future agenda items. Anybody have anything?
The only one that I might recommend is the Safescape, since that's going to be implemented July 1st to maybe get by August, they might have some good feedback on how that's going or not going.
Okay.
Feedback on oh, okay.
Bryce, do you have anything? Future agenda items?
Seeing none, we can move to public comment where we
Okay.
have Mac Rossi. Mac, you'll have 3 minutes.
Greetings again. I wanted to keep this under future agenda items, and I'll make this short because it's getting late. But I'm also a member of the County Advisory Board for District 1, and Carly is also. And we had a presentation by the Union Pacific Railroad. And when I seen it on the agenda, I just thought, this is going to be a real yawner. You look up and the train's either coming from the left or the right. But he put a tremendous, I feel, a real great presentation that made your public aware of what was going on with just that particular item. So it might be something to consider. I don't know whether Carly would like to address it, but I thought it was quite interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
there anyone else in the room who'd like to give public comment today? Actually, I think we have Pablo. Did you want to give public comment? Go ahead up. You'll have 3 minutes.
All right, guys, so this is the end of public comment for Ward 5 because I'm gonna talk to you after meeting about possibly with district. And also I want to know, like, I don't want to make everybody mad, so I try to do my best if I can to make sure everybody equal. See, so Ward 5 to Ward 6 to change Ward 5 to 6, and I did not know is that we don't have 5 ward since the foundation of city of Reno. I thought it used to be like 3 or 4 wards. Always 5, always 5. It looked like about to change to Ward 6. And plus I don't know where Caffrey, what area of Caffrey Taylor. Super majority of 5 council member. So thank you very much and have a.
Thank you, Pablo. Is there anyone else in the room who'd like to give public comment? Is there anyone on Zoom who'd like to give public comment? If you'd like to give public comment on Zoom, please use the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom window. No further public comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. One more item. We have to determine who will chair the August meeting. Have any? Would you like to do? Would you like to, Carol? I can do it another time. I could use the practice.
I will nominate Jeff Harvey to be the next chairperson. I guess it would be the August meeting, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Gary Cecil, I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And do I have a nomination for adjournment?
I will nominate to adjourn Carly Borchard for the record. Last time.
Gary Cecil, I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.